Well, hey everyone, welcome to Manna Church High Point's online messaging. As we always say, thank you so much for letting us be a part of your life. Hope you're blessed and doing great today. Thanks for joining us. Hey, I want to, if you're here for the first time or you've been coming around a little bit online, hey, would you let us hear from you? Go to our website. You can find out everything about us there at our website. You can fill out a Connect card, hit the Connect tab. You can worship with us with your giving. Join with us in worshiping with us with really embracing the word that you hear today and applying it to your life. But go to our website. We'd love to hear from you. And let's partner together to make it hard to go to hell, not only in High Point, but anywhere that you are. And the way we do that, of course, is Jesus being in our lives and us really just hearing what he says and simply just obeying him. And so if you want to find out more about Manna Church High Point, hit our Growth Track tab, and we'd love to get connected with you that way as well. So we are in week 5 of a series that we've entitled Guardrails, and we have really borrowed this series from a pastor by the name of Andy Stanley, and we've kind of taken his framework and have made it our own. And Guardrails, you know, the reason we're doing this is it's just it's a series that really, that's in a powerful way, practically takes God's word and applies it to our lives. You know, Christianity is not about a morality, but it has a morality. But it's really about the person of Jesus Christ. And this is the thing. And this is what Guardrails is about. Jesus is different. He's different. And therefore, our lives should be different. Our lives really should not mirror the world. And I'm not just talking about immorality. I'm talking about a mindset. And Guardrails elevates us to where Jesus is seated in the heavenly places. And then he informs us how to live in his kingdom while living on this earth. And that's what we're all striving to do, is to take the words of Christ, who is so different. He's just so different. He's better. He's good. And he calls us to be better and to be good, not just in our spirit, but to be better people in our nature. And Guardrails is about really applying that word there. So we're using the system of guardrails that you see on our roads and highways as a metaphor on how to practically walk with God and walk with others. So let me give you a definition of what the guardrails are on our highways. It's a system that the Department of Transportation, the DOT, has designed to keep vehicles from driving or straying or drifting into dangerous and off-limit areas of the road. And if you notice, all guardrails are never just set right on the edge, or they're never placed in the danger zones of the road. In other words, if you're crossing a bridge, you see the guardrails, you see some kind of railing, and they're never just set right on the edge, because if you hit the railing on the edge, then you're still over the bridge. Guardrails are always set several feet into the safe places of the road, so that if you hit the guardrail, there may be some damage, but it'll be minimal damage because you don't drive off the bridge and it'll spare your life. So taking that system as a metaphor, then guardrails, for our purposes, defining guardrails as a standard of behavior, something that we do. It's not the law. The edge of the road would be the law. The edge of the bridge would be the law. If you cross over the line of the bridge, you've broken the commandments and you're in sin. Guardrails are still placed in the safe areas. They're not the law, but it's a standard of behavior that you choose, something you come up with that becomes a matter of conscience if you bump into it. In other words, it's really a warning system that pricks our conscience, alerting us that we're about to cross the line. I've used this analogy with my dog and an underground fence. The underground fence is a system that has a shock collar with your dog, and it's not a dangerous shock, but anyway, you know this, that if the dog crosses the wire, it shocks his neck. But that's not the guardrail. That's crossing the line. The collar, actually, several feet before my dog gets to the wire, I no longer have a dog, but when we did, several feet before she got to the wire, the collar would simply beep, alerting, warning her that if she continues in that same direction without changing her mind and changing her direction, that she's going to suffer the negative consequences. And so that's what our guardrails will do. They're set up to beep. They're set up to light up our conscience before we cross the lines of God's commandments into sin. And so they're warnings that instruct us also to change our minds. You're headed this direction. Beep, beep. Your conscience alerts you. It's a standard you have set up so that, oh no, I'm almost there. And it beeps and alerts us not to cross that line. So God told Cain, and we find this idea of guardrails really in the Bible. God tells Cain, he says, sin is knocking at your door, but you must master it. You must turn before you run off the road. But Cain didn't heed God's warning. He ended up murdering his brother and drove right off the cliff and suffered the consequences. So this series has been encouraging us. Look, we need guardrails relationally. We need professional guardrails wherever you work. We need moral guardrails. We need guardrails in what we look at in our viewing entertainment. So let me just transition into today's message. We've been talking about relational guardrails. Last week, my wife and I talked about guardrails for your marriage. We've talked about infidelity and sex and guardrails for those things. And today I want to talk about financial guardrails. Now, don't let this scare you off. Please just stay with me for a moment. Remember, guardrails are things that you set up in your life, not things that I set up in your life. So I'm not trying to tell you what to do, especially if you don't know God. Listen, if you don't know God, or you're far from God, and you don't really follow the teachings of Christ closely to implement them in your life, then this is just going to be good information for you. And I believe me, what I have to say today, even if you're not a Christian, it will help you in your life. But if you are a Christian, it is a must that you set these guardrails up. And so I want to talk about financial guardrails. One, because Jesus has something to say about money. Or as we'll see, he calls it, the Greek word is mammon. And well, we need to listen to what Jesus says because Jesus is just always right. And if you're a Christian, you really don't have an option of that. So I want to talk about guardrails, financial guardrails, because Jesus has something to say about money. And also because people are just stressed out about their money. So let me start with this second reason first, and then I'll get to the first one. To say that we have a mental health crisis in our nation, an identity crisis in our nation, is an understatement. The reason for the current realities of stress levels and those kinds of things vary from individual to individual. But generally speaking, stress is at an all-time high in our culture, and people are living with stress and managing it rather than getting relief from it. In 2017, and last year in 2022, studies of the causes of stress were done. And the following are listed as the top 3 causes of stress. Now, I'm not talking about events. I mean, events like the death of a loved one or moving or divorce. These are all highly stressful events. I'm not really talking about these events. I'm talking about in general. These studies really speak to what Americans are dealing with in general. The top 3 causes of stress in 2017 were money, work, and the economy. In 2022, it was inflation, the economy, and money. I guess you see a pattern here. I mean, out of all of those studies, money, the economy, these things are all related. Work, all related to our provision. Money is the top reoccurring theme as the cause for much of our stress today. Provision for today and provision for the future. One of the biggest hindrances, in addition to this stress that we're worried about money, do I have enough? If I have it, I want to spend it. And will I have enough for the future, so I want to hoard it? But another hindrance, and maybe one of the biggest hindrances in the midst of this stress, No one, in fact, I think it is the largest trap of life, and that is when we compare ourselves to others, which just piles on top of the stress of our financial positions. I've fallen into this trap, and I'm sure you have as well. You know, here's the thing. Comparing myself to others, when I compare myself to others, it makes me want to have what others have. It makes me want to save like others save and sacrifice like others sacrifice. But I wonder, listen, and this is the question you and I have to ask. I wonder what I would really want if I didn't know what you had. I wonder how much I would have given in my life if I didn't know how much you had saved. I wonder how much I would have saved if I didn't know how much you had given. I wonder how much I would have sacrificed if I didn't know how much you sacrificed. In other words, I wonder what I would do or what you would do if we only knew what Jesus said to do with our finances and then just simply obeyed. I wonder what we would do if all we really knew was what Jesus said to do with our finances and we actually did it without comparing ourselves to other people and what they did. Because what you see other people do, it has influence on you and me. And it's one of the biggest traps that you and I could get in. So that's the one reason I want to talk about is the stress we live with and the comparison. But let me get to the first reason I want to talk about financial guardrails is because what Jesus has to say about money. Now, you know what's really funny about all this, and thank you for letting me just look at my notes and remind me. There's two areas of New Testament teaching that are most disregarded by Christians. Two areas of the New Testament teaching that Jesus brings that are most disregarded. You know what those areas are? It's sex and money. Everybody wants to know, or many people, all Christians want to know what Jesus has to say about sex and about money. And then when they find out what he has to say about those things, we become a running back and we start stiff-arming him. He wants to tackle us, but we try to keep it at bay. And because of how the church has presented what Jesus says about sex and money, the word on the street is that the church is against sex and the church just wants my money. That is the perception. God is against sex. But listen, God is not against sex. He told Adam and Eve, he said, to be fruitful and multiply. In other words, he said, be intimate with one another and have lots of babies and then teach them my character and let them grow up and have lots of babies. And not only that did he institute sex and invented sex, he also made it pleasurable. But God also isn't against money either. God doesn't want to just keep you poor. God is God. He doesn't want us to focus on money. He is not against money. The lie is God just wants to take something from you to teach you to sacrifice. That's a lie. That's a lie. God doesn't need your money. God does not need your money. And in fact, the church, God's church, also does not need your money. It's his church. But this is what God understands. This is what God knows that we really don't know. But God understands how easily the heart of his people are seduced by the lure and the lie of what money promises. And when it comes to financial guardrails, listen to this. When it comes to what I'm talking about today, financial guardrails, it's not what God can get from you. It's what he has for you. That's why we want to do this. Now, God does want something, but he wants something for you more than he wants something from you. And quite frankly, until you have that revelation that God has something for you, that's what his lines are about, that's what his morality is about. He has something for you that if we obey that, he has something for you. And until you have that you got to have a revelation that God's commands are not to get something from you that you don't want to give. And his commands don't exist to stop you from doing something that you want to do. The revelation is that he has something for you. Because if you don't understand that, then you will just consume and you will hoard. You will just spend unbridled and you'll just close your hand and not give. So let's look at what Jesus has to say about money. He has a lot to say. We're going to look at one scripture. And let me warn you, what Jesus said is profound, but it's also radical. Hey, Jesus is different. Therefore, we must be different if we're to be like him. We don't just follow him halfway. If God is holy, he says, you shall be holy. I'm different, and I'm calling you to be different because I have something for you that the world doesn't know. Matthew 6:24. No one, that means anyone, no one can serve two masters. No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. Very strong language. You cannot serve, look at this, God and wealth. You cannot serve God and wealth. Now, when most of us read this, including myself, we read this passage more like this. No one can serve two bosses. He will either serve the one boss or the other boss, but not both bosses at the same time. That's kind of how we interpret it. And when Jesus says you will either love one or hate one, be devoted to one or despise one, we typically go, oh yeah, I know what he means. I mean, basically, he's just saying, I need to love God and hate Satan. I need to be devoted to God and despise Satan. But neither of those things is what he says. That's not what he's saying. First, Jesus doesn't say it's either God or Satan that we serve, that we're devoted to or despise. He says it's either God or wealth. He doesn't mention Satan. He says it's either God or wealth. And that Greek word for wealth is translated, is the word mammon, which can mean possessions. It can mean stuff. It can mean material things. It means money. It means all of those things. It's either God or wealth. The second thing, when Jesus uses the word master, he says you cannot serve two masters. When he uses the word master, it doesn't mean boss at all. It doesn't mean someone who gets to tell you what to do because they pay you. It actually means someone who owns you, someone who possesses you, someone who controls you as property. In other words, it's ownership. So what Jesus is saying is this: no one can be owned by two different masters. You are owned by someone. You are either owned by God, or he says you're either owned by wealth, stuff, mammon, money. The primary issue. So when it comes to money, so here's the thing. We are either owned by God or we are owned by stuff. Owned by what we have. So when it comes to money, the primary issue for Jesus isn't the money or our stuff. It's not that. The primary issue is ownership. See, he doesn't say that money is bad. He's saying being owned by it, being owned by stuff. You're either owned by me or your stuff. And the issue is ownership. It's about mastery. It's about control. What controls us? The statement Jesus just made about ownership can be posed into a question. And it's a bit cliche, but it's relevant. And you've heard this. Do we have money, or does money have us? Do we own money, or does money own us? Do we have God in our lives, or does God own our lives? And the reason we need financial guardrails is because money and what money promises, which is false comfort and security. Excuse me. The reason we need financial guardrails is because money and what money promises is the chief competitor for you and your heart. In this statement, Jesus just gets right to the heart of the matter. God is not against stuff. God is not against money. But what he's talking about is you're either mastered by one or the other. He says the greatest competition that exists in your heart isn't whether you will be owned by God or Satan, but will you be owned by God or money? Said another way, will you be owned by the God of all comfort, or owned by the comfort money falsely promises to buy you? See, the thing that bothers me, listen, and I don't know about you. Sometimes when I read the words of Jesus and what he says, I just get bothered. It bothers me because there's something going on in my heart that I don't like what he says. And the thing that bothers me the most about what Jesus said is that he didn't give me another option of ownership or servitude or worship. He didn't say, I want him to say it's either God or Satan, because I can easily say, I'm owned by God, not Satan. But oftentimes I'm looking at my finances and I'm looking at God, and I struggle with who's really owning me. He says, it's either me or mammon, It's either me or worldly things. He deals with my stuff and what I've earned and what I think I own. He's dealing with that. It was the same thing that bothered the rich young ruler, if you remember that story. There was a rich young man who had a lot of stuff, and Jesus said to him, this guy comes up, Jesus says, what can I do to inherit eternal life? And he says he keeps all the commandments, all the morality. He keeps it all. And Jesus said this. He said this, sell all that you have, give to the poor, and follow me. And the rich young man walked away sad. And this is what it says. He walked away sad and walked away from God because he owned much property, or really, he was owned by much property. He wanted God to be part of his life, but he wasn't owned by God. He owned much property, and his property owned him. Without financial guardrails, people tend to feel the pressure to get stuff now. I got to have it now. To consume, upgrade, or to hoard. And when you hoard, it's from a fear, what if I don't have enough? What if? But each one are motivated by self. I want now and buy everything I can and consume and upgrade. I got to stay up. I got to stay up with what's going on. I got to buy, spend. Or, I'm afraid that I won't have enough for the future. So what if I don't have enough? So I got to hoard. But both are about self. And the root cause of both, here's the thing, is a word, the root cause of both of these things, to hoard and to spend, is a word we can't really see clearly in the mirror. It's a word called greed. And see, this is what Jesus is really getting at. This guy, Andy Stanley, defines greed as the assumption is that all my finances are for my consumption. The assumption is it's all for my consumption. Greed isn't personified by Ebenezer Scrooge, some old miserly guy denying everyone everything. Greed is simply the assumption that if it's placed in my hands, it's all for me. If it's deposited in my bank account, it's all for me. If it's deposited in my 401k, it's all for me. If it's part of my inheritance, it's all for me. If I win the lottery, it's all for me. And when we live that way, this is pointed. When we live that way, we are living as if there is no God at all. We're living as if all there is to this life is my life, and I have to get what is mine. It's mine. It's just mine. And when we live that way, we're living as if there's no God at all. Jesus communicated this same idea as living if there's no God at all in this way in Matthew 8:36 and 38. It says, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Again, he's talking about ownership here. He says, if you are owned by the material world, afraid to lose your stuff, then you will forfeit my ownership. As if I don't exist at all. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world, living as if there is no God, so that he can gain everything for the future because there is no God and I have to provide for myself? What we end up doing is we exchange the glory of the eternal for the glory of the temporal. It's exactly what Paul said the people did in Romans 1:23. They exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, material things. He goes on to say, for what will a man give in exchange for his soul? In other words, what of all the temporal possessions that you have gained can you possibly exchange or barter with for the eternal? He goes on to say, for whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. In other words, there is a God and he does exist, and we need to live as if he does exist. You either live in the temporal world for temporal things, or you live in the temporal world for the eternal things. But you and I know there's something more than just this world. That there's something more than live, eat, drink, die, and then it's just all over. And knowing that, as a Christian, as a believer, we have to allow God to deal with this area of our life and not be mastered or owned by consuming and hoarding. Look, not if. What I'm about to say, it's not if, but when. When we get into financial crisis, not if, but when, either by our own decisions or because someone else's decision or something just completely out of our control, the first thing we do when we get into financial crisis, regardless if we put ourselves, it's just outside of us, you know what we do? We pray, oh God, and we invite God into our finances. And all of us have prayed that at one time. So here's the thing. So if we're going to invite God into our finances when we're in crisis, if eventually we hit crisis and we're just going to invite God into our finances, why don't we just go ahead and invite him into our finances now before we hit crisis? Doesn't that just make sense as followers of Christ? So let's look at some guardrails that invites God to be our master rather than being mastered by money. And that is what the issue is. I'm telling you, look, this is not about tithing. This is not about getting your money. It's about something that's in our hearts, what we're being mastered by. These guardrails really are a matter of priorities. And let me say again right up front. Guardrails are things you put in place. What I'm suggesting you can do, you can add to, or not do at all. But what I'm asking you to do and what you need to do is, because of this thing being ownership and being mastered, we have to guard our heart from being mastered by anything other than God. We need to set up guardrails that alerts us, that the beep goes off and says, hey, you are in danger of crossing the line. And listen, maybe you've already crossed the line into debt or bankruptcy, and you're just racking up debt, and you have all this stuff. Listen, it's not too late to start. But let me tell you something. Jesus indicates here that we can avoid bankruptcy. We can avoid credit card debt. We might even have all of our school loans paid off, our kids' school loans paid off, our cars paid off, our house paid off. Maybe you have zero debt. But if we don't have this around our heart because of greed, because of consumption and hoarding and making self the priority, if we don't have guardrails, it doesn't matter whether we're in debt or we don't have any debt at all. We still can cross the line into financial ruin because it is God who has something to say about who we are and who owns us. So here's the thing. Being mastered by money or being mastered by God or being the master of money is really a set of priorities. When you're mastered by money, the priority kind of goes like this. Live, save, and then give. Live and spend my money on me. This is being mastered by money. I just want to live. I got my money. I'm going to spend it on me. I need to save. I need to save for retirement. I need to save for later, but it's still about me. Spend now about me. Spend later about me. And then give. And after I live and do what I want to do, and after I save for my future, so whenever my retirement or whatever it is, then I'll give. And maybe if there's any left over, I feel some compassion. If there's a flood or an earthquake or something going on in my community and somebody has need, maybe I'll give a little bit. Maybe. Or maybe I'll give a little bit to the church. But living like this is living as the only thing in life is life and no God. But if you will shift these priorities and set up these guardrails, you will move from being mastered by money to you mastering money. Money being mastered by you. Instead of live, save, and give, set it up this way. Give, then save, then live. Give first, save second, live on the rest third. And look, this works whether you're a Christian or not. This just works. These are guardrails that keep us out of the reach of greed and set us up to live in the promises of God. First, give to someone else. Second, save for later. Do these things first in the order of prayer. Before you start living, give, then save, then third, live on the rest. Now, to kind of play this out a little bit, when our kids were young and old enough, we started to teach them about money, that money wasn't everything, and that money was not their source of provision, but God was. And we wanted them to learn that God would provide for them. And I think my wife came up with this idea. Maybe she heard it from someone. I'm not sure. But she kind of came up with this idea. And I can't remember if we put jars out or boxes or little baggies. But we put 3 jars or 3 baggies, 3 boxes in each of their rooms, and we labeled them. And I can't remember exactly how we labeled them, but it was something like this. In jar 1, so to speak, we labeled it give. Just put a jar and we had put the word give on it. Second jar was labeled save, and the third jar was labeled live. And as soon as they got their allowance, we paid allowance, or if they did odd jobs, babysitting or walking dogs, anytime they got money, the first thing we did was we taught them to take the amount of money they got and put 10% in the give jar immediately. Secondly, we told them to take another 10% of that whole amount and put it in the save jar. And then in the third jar, the rest of what they had later, we just said you can live. And you just use it any way you want. You can buy clothes with it. You can buy candy with it. You can spend on anything you want. Now, in that first jar, in jar 1, the give jar, you put money in and money goes out. You save it. You put it in the give jar to give away. And then in jar 3, you put it in to live on. And those monies were going up and down. But the second jar, the save jar, it just continued to increase. It didn't mean that they wouldn't have to live by faith or anything like this. It says we did this to teach them to live as if there was a God and that He loved them and He would look after them. And you know, we set up these guardrails not because, here's the thing. The give jar, they tithed with. That was their tithe. And did we make them tithe because the church needed their $1.50? Of course not. No, we were teaching them so that they would put their trust in God and that there was a God and there was something bigger than them and that He was their source and their provider. We just did this so they would know that God loved them. And when we set up these guardrails like this, you know what it produced for them? It produced financial independence. Financial independence. See, I believe true financial independence isn't having enough income or wealth sufficient to pay your living expenses for the rest of your life without having to depend on others. Financial dependence in the kingdom of God is being free from being controlled by the fear of not having enough and being freed from the unbridled appetite to just consume so that you can live dependent on God. Financial independence is being freed from being mastered by money and allowing yourself to be mastered by God and you mastering money. It's declaring independence from living independent of God for the rest of your life. That is the issue Jesus is getting at here. Jesus says, let me be your master and don't be mastered by money. It's not about tithing. Financial guardrails is not about tithing. It is about mastery, ownership. Now, Jesus says this in Matthew 6. He says, you cannot serve two masters. Either you hate one, despise the other, love the one. You can't serve God and mammon. And right after that, in the very next verse, he says this in Matthew 6:25. For this reason, because you can't be owned by two different things, either God or money. And if you'll be owned by God, he says, for this reason, because you can't be owned by two things, I say to you, if you're mastered by God, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Your Father will provide for you. If we set up these guardrails, then we don't have to worry about what you will eat, about what you will drink, or about what you will wear. You won't have to worry about tomorrow. Because if you do worry, you know what you will do? You will end up closing your hand and you'll tighten up. The promise is not that you will have an abundance of material things. In this promise, he says you don't have to worry. You're living your life, you're living temporarily in this life for the eternal as if there is a God and he's in control of your life. When you tighten up, and you don't make giving a priority, when you don't allow God to deal with that, then you close your hand and you live as if there is no God who's involved in your life. So the promise isn't that he will give you an abundance of material things. The promise here is you will live in the glory of the eternal God without being mastered by the tyranny of the temporal. So these are guardrails. Set them up, I beg you. It's the life of freedom. It was for freedom that Christ set you free. And oftentimes, because of what God has for us, freedom, it requires something that restrains our own heart. And really, Guardrails, as we'll find out next week, really is about setting guardrails around our heart so that God stays the master of it. Listen, can't wait to bring the word to you next week, and I hope this one has encouraged you. Ponder it. If you're not a believer, think about what Jesus says. I mean, even if you're not a believer, most people, if you're not a follower of Christ, if you're not following hard after Him, most people still want to know what He has to say. I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to get into the Bible. I encourage you to follow up with us. And if you don't know who God is, if you haven't given your life to God, we want to pray with you. We want to help you do that. There's nothing magical about saying a prayer. What is powerful and is transformational is when you have a revelation of who Jesus Christ is, that He is the eternal God, and He alone saves you. He's not asking you to be clean. He's not asking you to be more moral today. What He's asking you is to look Him in the eye and let Him show you who He is so that you can walk with Him and know Him. And out of that relationship, He's alive. Out of that relationship, it will transform your life. Let us hear from you. We want to pray for you. Love you. Hey, let you go. God bless you. Have a great rest of your day or night or whenever and wherever you are. We'll see you right here next week.
And now I know that this is the good life. Never look back when I traded for a day in my own life. Never look back 'cause I know that you are always with me. I got you, I know you got me. This is the good life. You gave me the good life. I always thought that I'd be fine, chasing all the things that left me dead inside.